Paglia, coming out and saying, okay, hold on, ladies. We have to look at the science and admit. Now, I'm quoting the feminists here. We have to admit that this baby is human. The science tells us this. We have to admit that there's a baby in our wombs, ladies. But then Naomi Wolf went on to say, but we still have the right to kill it. That's extraordinary. Welcome to the culture of death. You see, because that's the plan of the enemy. It's to lie, so in the end he can murder. That's the stark reality of our day. And Pope John Paul himself, in his encyclical on the Gospel of Life, said, we have reached the extraordinary turning point where human society has developed a charter of human rights to grant human rights, to where now we are turning, where those very people who grant the rights are now taking them away from the weakest members. In your own country, they're debating whether or not your grandparents and your parents should receive health care. That's the culture of death. You see why statues of our Blessed Mother are crying throughout the world? And icons of Christ are bleeding blood. I've seen some of them. Science has studied them and they can't explain it. Atheists are always looking for miracles except the one you show them. Thus, in 1976, a cardinal came to America and he addressed your bishops and he said this: we are facing the final confrontation between the church and the anti-church, between the gospel and the anti-gospel. It is a trial which lies within the plans of divine providence. It is a trial which the whole church must take up. And 2 years later, that cardinal became John Paul II. He said we are facing the final confrontation between the church and the anti-church. But listen to what he said. It lies within the plans of divine providence. That is to say, God's in charge. And that's why 2 years later, when he became Pope, he stood out on the balcony of St. Peter's Square and he looked out across the entire church and he said, do not be afraid. Open wide your hearts to Jesus Christ. Brothers and sisters, do not be afraid. Young people, give Christ a chance. Everywhere he went, he kept saying, open wide your hearts to Jesus. Because the more you open your heart to Jesus, the more love enters your heart. And John said that perfect love casts out all fear. I'm not afraid of our days, and I'll tell you why. Because the woman crushes the head of the serpent. Victory that conquers the world is our faith, and greater is he who lives in me than he who is in the world. Do not be afraid, brothers and sisters. The only thing you have to be afraid of is to walk away from Christ. That's the only thing, to close your heart to him. Then we should be afraid. Because it says right in John chapter 3, he said, God so loved the world that he sent his only Son, so that whoever believes in him should not perish, but will have eternal life. But if you go right to the end of that chapter, do you know what it says? But those who refuse to believe are already condemned, and they must then face the wrath of God. You see, Jesus came, he said, I'm the gate. But we have to choose to enter the gate. We have to choose to enter and follow Jesus. You know, the thing is, when you grow up in the Catholic Church, when you grow up as a Catholic, we get into the rhythm of it. And things just because, I go to church because my parents said so. I go to church because that's what my mom and dad did. Someone was joking with me tonight. They were saying over supper, right before supper, my husband used to go to this church and I'd go to that church because that's the church he always went to, but I went to this church because I wanted to be fed. You see, even we Catholics can get into a rhythm and we forget the whole reason these walls are here. We forget the whole reason these stained glass windows and everything. And I tell you, the Lord will take it all away if it means we are to find him again. What's it all about? It's about your soul. It's about your salvation. And few are those, Jesus said, few are those who find it. Let those words ring in your heart, not as a threat, but as a wake-up call. For wide and easy is the road, Jesus said, that leads to perdition. It's easy to follow along with the tides. As Kevin, my host, walked along with me on the canal, I could see the water flowing through the canal today. And those currents, and it's easy to get in that current and just float along with it. Float along with the rest of the world. Float along with the rest of the world who says, you know what? The church is behind the times. To float along away from truth that sets us free into slavery. And Christ tonight invites you back. He invites you back. Brothers and sisters, there's more I could say to you about the times that we're living in. I think I've said enough. I've written a book in which page after page I quote the Holy Fathers. I quote the Church Fathers. Because one woman wrote me one day and she said, you know what, Mark? If we're living in the last days, if we're living in the end times, she said, why aren't the popes shouting? And so then I had a writing on my blog, which is markmallett.com/blog. And in that writing, I show exactly what the popes are saying. Just one example, for instance, Pope Paul VI said, there's a great uneasiness in this time in the world and in the church, and that which is in question is the faith. I sometimes read the gospel passage of the end times, and I attest that at this time, some signs of the end are emerging. That's Pope Paul VI, not Mark Mallett. Did you know that 108 years ago, Pope Leo XIII, Pope Pius X rather, in an encyclical, said as he looked at the apostasy, which means rebellion in the church and in the world, he said at the end of his encyclical that the son of perdition, the Antichrist, may already be on earth. That's a pope. What would Pius X say if he was here today? Because when judges in America and Canada and in the Western world put on their judicial garments and sit at their benches and overturn the natural law, that's when you know there's lawlessness. And St. Paul said, hold on. When people tell you Jesus is returning, like Harold Camping, remember Harold Camping 2 days ago said the world was going to end? Right? Poor Harold. Poor Harold. Someone needs to just give a Bible to Harold. And give him the page back that he ripped out. It says, no one will know the day or the hour. What was I saying, Father? It had to be good because I always forget the good things, The popes, speaking about the popes. No, we won't know the day or the hour, but Jesus said we'll know the time.